Hey everybody, how's it going? Andrew here, and I just wanted to say, if you're listening to the show, there's probably a good chance you're finding the discussions helpful. But even if the content is helpful, if you're ever uncertain of how to apply this information and take action, then having a guide that understands your needs and helps you find solutions could make all the difference for you. Look, I love helpful content and do my best to apply it in ways that help me grow my business and even myself. But I also know navigating challenges alone or even with a team can be a daunting task. Hey, I'm a strong believer in a bad decision now is better than making a perfect decision later. But you know what? I'd rather reduce that risk and take action now. This is the reason why I have my own guides to help me on my journey. So if you feel that you're struggling with anything in yours or feeling uncertain about how to tackle your challenges, let's chat. I'm always happy to learn more about my listeners, especially if there are ways that I can help you solve your problems. So if you're up for a chat, please visit rengenmarketing.com and click on the Let's Chat in the nav menu. At the very least, my goal is to get to know you a little so I can help guide you in the right direction. So thanks again for being such great listeners. Let's get right to the show. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, and we're going to be talking about creating marketable prototypes and crushing your scope. So exploring ideas and concepts for a new project is always fun, especially when you're ready to develop a prototype. But sometimes passion, drive, and even opportunity can be a distraction that could easily send you off course. So today, we're going to dive deep with our guests and discuss their process of exploring concepts, implementing prototypes, and how to keep things on track, even if it means completely trashing some of your work. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey everybody, and we're back, and today with us I have Jeroen Janssen. Jeroen, how's it going? And thank you so much for being on the show.
I'm doing great, and thank you for having me, Andrew.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And for those of you who don't know, Jeroen is the CEO and founder at Happy Volcano, which is an award-winning studio. They have done so much stuff in the past, gotten quite a bit of notoriety from the work that they've done, and that includes projects such as the Almost Gone, which is a really interesting game, and also USEC at Parking. Yes, it is as fun as it sounds. Definitely something worth checking out. And you also have a lot of other projects that are heating things up there at Happy Volcano, which we're probably going to dive into a little bit more, considering that's kind of what we're talking about in here today. But that said, you're also a board member of the Flemish Games Association, and a board member of the Flanders Game Hub too. So really getting involved with the whole, game development scene there in Belgium. And then outside of that, I mean, you also have like a huge, extensive background in online marketing and advertising too, which is really cool and couldn't be a better fit than to have you on the show with that background and everything else that you're doing now. So again, can't thank you enough for being here. And real quick, I'm curious. I mean, you're doing a lot. Clearly, you're busy. But when you have some downtime, what kind of things do you like to do, as hobbies or stuff to kind of relax and unplug a little bit?
I would love to say gaming, but time is too little. Time is too little when you're running a studio. But no, I guess my downtime or my relax thing is cooking. I like to cook. Dinner, that sort of stuff. I like to cook for people. The more, the merrier. You should come over someday.
Yes. Oh, that sounds very inviting. So, what's the thing you like to cook them? What's your favorite dish you like to make?
Oh, that's so hard because it depends. It depends on the moods, but I'm a huge barbecue guy.
Okay.
So summer, winter, whatever, I'll put on the green egg and roll some veggies and some meat and that sort of stuff.
Okay, so I did not know that about you. I have a green egg myself. So
it's the best.
It is. For those of you who don't know, it's a ceramic grilling cooking smoker, essentially. Lots you can do with it. But anyways, okay, offline, we're going to have to talk sometime soon about some barbecue amazingness stuff. And yeah, and if anyone else is interested, reach out. I will talk nonstop about smoking on anything. Anyways, I don't want to digress here, but good to know. Glad you really get into cooking and everything else like that. And again, I never knew that, so that's really interesting. That said, want to dive in a little bit deeper about you as we go through the Q Box round. Just some random questions I prepared for Jeroen here today. And well, are you ready for the Q Box, Jeroen?
I am so ready.
All right. What advice would you give someone else that's just starting out?
Like starting out as a studio?
As a studio, yes.
Oh, get a good accountant. They are very much worth their weight in gold, and you will have to pay them a lot of money just as a lawyer. But yeah, that's sort of external stuff. No, I think it's important that you have some business sense. I see a lot of studios starting with a very cool idea or probably over scope, but yeah, still a cool idea of a game. But then, yeah, somebody needs to take on the business side. And if you have only programmers and artists, some of them need to do it, and you need to have a little bit of background. Like the good thing that we as a studio, the three founders, we came from an advertising background, but that also means that I was an account manager. So I knew how to make budgets. I knew how to make timelines. I knew how to, because that stuff is so important, especially when you're first starting out. So yeah, maybe that.
Okay.
Get some business sense.
Awesome. Why do you make games?
Because I'm not good at anything else. No, I don't know. No. Why do I make games? Because I love games. Like I said, we worked in advertising and we were so tired of it. And then there was an opportunity for the three of us to start working on games, and it's just so cool to see like an idea come to life. Like a stupid little idea, like a racing game where the goal is to stop, and that turns out into the monster of a game that You Suck at Parking is at the moment. Yeah, and then if you see the contribution of everybody on the team, how it looks, how it sounds, how it plays, it's just I think the joy in the creation of something unique, I guess. Could have been something else, but it's games at the moment, because that's like, I think that's all of, I don't want to start the art discussion, but it's sort of all of the art disciplines in itself. You've got like sculpture, you've got like music, you've got like film, you've got like literature. Basically, they all come together in games, and then it's on top of that interactive.
Yeah.
Beautiful place to be.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that too, where my background was in film, and then I moved over to games, and I see a huge comparison to the two, but the one component that I think is a little bit better, and I think it's a little bit more of a friendly space, is also the interactive part. I mean, that's a big factor. But anyways, really, really cool reason for it. And then last but not least, might be a tough one here, but what game are you playing now?
Oh, that's not a tough one. No, there's only one game that I've consistently been playing since I guess December last year, and that's Marvel Snap. Ah,
yes, we've had other guests in the past that have been playing that, and it's still going strong. It sounds like, but Marvel Snap.
Yes, I play it daily. It's such a beautifully designed puzzle. It's a math puzzle in essence, and it's also like 2 or 3 minutes per match, so you can do it almost anywhere where you have some free time.
I like that.
So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for providing all that extra information, and so we can get to know you a little bit more. And with that said, now we're here to get really into the meat of this discussion, and what I'm excited about, simply because if I recall correctly, out of all the episodes with IGM, this is the first time we're having this conversation, which is about creating marketable prototypes and really crushing your scope, because these are all things that we strive to do, right, as game creators. So to kind of kick this off, when you're looking to explore concepts for new games, how much of a role does your studio's brand or portfolio play in the types of projects that you want to make?
That's a good question, because at the moment, what would be the smart thing to do for us is to do like a you suck at parking too, or you suck at boating, or you suck at flying, because that's our brand right now. That's what people know us from. We're actually not doing that at all. We're doing something completely different in a genre that we are super interested in, and that we want to dive into. Because actually, going back to your second parking, that was meant to be a palate cleanser in between games. Wasn't never meant to be like this big. But yeah, so I would say it is important. Very important if you can build on your audience and your community and what people expect from you. And but at the same time, yeah, I'm not following my own advice here.
But, let's talk about that real quick for a second. Well, first and foremost, I mean, I want to explore real quick about the when you say palate cleanser and that being like, is it to kind of differentiate a little bit in terms of the direction the team wants to go in, the studio wants to go in, or is it also just to do something different to change the pace and refresh? And
yeah, a little bit of both, I guess. So you suck at parking, was really a palate cleanser because we just made the Almost Gone, which was a very dark narrative exploration game about death and about all kind of sad stuff. So the team was a little bit I wouldn't say depressed, but if you're working on like a depressing game, after a while you kind of sort of feel. So we wanted to make it something cheerful, joyful, colorful, racing game. It was meant to be like a single player game with like 100 levels. Turned out that we made a multiplayer level with a whole season system and lots of levels in the end. So it sort of was like the Katamari Damacy. It sort of grew bigger and bigger along the way. Like we increased scope, also because we got some investment from Hero Capital that we could increase scope a little bit. But yeah, it was meant to be a very small game, but it didn't turn out like that. But yeah, that's sort of the palate cleanser idea.
Yeah, and the reason why I wanted to explore that a little bit further, and thank you for sharing that, is because it's like, even though like you're saying, hey, I was going against my own advice, but at the same time, it's like sometimes making those pivots, some of those shifts or whatnot are needed, and to kind of help, find what that direction is too. Because, right now, as you say, things are kind of shifting out a little bit. So, I mean, with that said, I want to explore this further in terms of like concepts and implementing prototypes, right? So, outside of considering your brand and portfolio, because I mean, hey, it's great to have that audience, but sometimes it all depends on what it is that you guys really want to do, what your team wants to do, and all these other what you're passionate about. What would you say are some of the key factors you consider when you are exploring these concepts for future projects?
Yeah, I think there's work to be done before you start prototyping. You have to look at the market, see what popular genres are, if there's room for something that you can make. At least if you wanna look at it like on a commercial level and not just make like your dream game or your arty game, which is totally fair and totally fine as well. But if you're running a studio of 20 people, then you need to look at budgets and commercial viability and product market fit and that sort of stuff first. So what we did right here for our new concept is really dove into Steam and looked at what is working right now and what do we think is still going to be working in a year, 2 years time, and if there is room for something else, because you're not going to make a football game because there's already FIFA and nobody's going to buy your other game because everybody's buying FIFA. So that's not a good. Well, there's only one big football game. You're probably not going to make a new football game. Or a soccer game, as you call it, I think.
Yes. But
sorry for that.
That's okay. I think the principle applies to whether it's soccer or football.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so that took us a little bit of work, and then okay, you find a genre that you really want to work in. And then we looked at other titles out there, really went into sort of detail on what they do and what they do good and what they do bad. And at the same time, we're also working on sort of initial ideas, or David, at least, our game director, is on initial ideas of what could we do in this space that is different or a little bit different than the rest, because that's one of the things that we always want to do at Happy Volcano is we take a genre or we take a game that is sort of well established, a racing game, for instance, for your circuit parking. But what is the twist that we can do? What is a creative twist that people haven't seen yet? And that is in that case was Racing Game to Stop. Now in this case, it's something different. And that's the start. That's actually the start. The start of your prototyping starts with I think best starts with a business proposition or a product market fit, or at least something that when you have a prototype that you can also say to the publisher, to whatever you're working with, the platform, look, there is a business case for these types of games.
Yeah. And
it doesn't work for every kind of game. There's definitely indies that did some weird shit and came out of nowhere or started even a complete new genre. There's definitely room for that as well. But for us, as a sort of a little bit bigger studio, we need to look at the budget and the numbers as well, and that makes that you remove a little bit of the creativity. At the same time, you set sort of a framing or a box where creativity can go freely inside. But it isn't free for all anymore.
Yeah. So to really being focused and going through that process, like you said, for market fit, understanding, what's the demand out there, or on top of that, what's also, ways that you can improve upon that. That's already there. And not necessarily, and when we say like demand, not necessarily looking from a trending perspective, but more so of just overall as a market or whatever. Because again, you said earlier, you're trying to project for the next year or so. Is it still going to be viable down then? Is there a good track record of this being the case? And again, all about that market analysis. So it sounds like after that process, you can start really narrowing things down, and validating some ideas and concepts that go into that process you just outlined. Now, once you get to that point, what does the implementation look like for your studios when you're starting to, let's say, okay, let's get some prototypes out there based off of our analysis, our research?
Yeah. So we always start out with the idea that prototype code is code that we can throw away, which means that we can work fast, find solutions, or just smoke and mirrors. It just needs to work. It doesn't need to be optimized. It doesn't need to be good. It just needs to convey the idea, or at least be able to test what our assumptions are. Is this fun to do? Is this interesting enough? And so there is definitely nothing that needs to be looking good or working well in the background. I think that's an important difference between prototyping and actually starting pre-production or production. Is that everything needs to go anyway. Obviously, probably some you can reuse some stuff, but the idea is to actually think about, we start from scratch the moment that we do pre-production. So go wild and go fast, because speed is a second, I think, very important thing, because mostly when you're prototyping, there is definitely a stress on budget and time, because you're in between games, or you're doing it at the end of production of your last game, but you can't keep prototyping forever.
Right.
So you need to get to your answers fast, and as fast as possible, because if you know your assumptions and you know that you're right and that this is the game to be made, because that's in the end, that's the end result, I guess, from prototyping, is making a decision with your team. Is this what we're going to work on for the next 2 years, 3 years time? And then the third thing is obviously scope of your prototype. What do you need to prototype and what not? I guess if you're working in, There's definitely some stuff in each genre that you don't need to prototype because there's enough examples out there that it works. So you need to sort of be sure about yourself that you can make this work. But there's also always like if we're talking about the creative twist again, that's the sort of prototype that you need because that's going to be different. That's going to be unique. That's going to be your game. So you need to be able to do that. And all of the fluff, just assume that you're going to nail it in production. I guess that's important. Also, you don't need to make one big prototype. Sometimes it's just like different Unity projects that are all showing one little aspect of a game. It doesn't need to look pretty. You have an art scene or an art prototype for that later on. When you sort of decide that this is going to be the game, then you put in the art stuff. But in the beginning, it all looks like blocks and circles and spheres.
Yeah, of course.
It doesn't look good.
No, but I mean, those are some really interesting points there. And I would say if you could really boil it down to one whole concept is like less is more. Because the less you're putting yourself work with those principles. I mean, you outlined, what do you need a prototype? Because we could get carried away in all these like all the other things like, hey, this genre needs this type of mechanic. But if you already know that that's already established and have the focus of okay, but what is the twist? What's the hook? Then it already eliminates a lot of what that scope could potentially be, and then the speed and the code. Yeah,
and there's definitely also a big chance that you're going to cancel the prototype because it doesn't do what you think it does. If it's not fun. So the faster you are, the less you need to throw away stuff that you're never going to use again.
And to that point too, I think that's a really big important one that might be hard for a lot of people to grasp is actually getting to a point where realizing like, hey, or setting the expectation of, hey, we're going to go through this knowing that there's stuff that's going to get tossed. And probably really important from a team perspective because there's nothing more, I think, worse than knowing you're working on something and then being told, oh, we're going to scrap this, right? But if you have that expectation for what the ultimate goal is, hey, we got to make sure that's fun, Because if it's not, and we keep doing something that doesn't work out, that's time, resources, everything that's being wasted.
And it's both inside one game, like features that you're gonna throw away, but also it's completely new game IDs, complete prototypes that just aren't what they need to be actually go to pre-production.
Right. And your team that's working on it is important to make sure that they're not demoralized that like, hey, we went through 3 prototypes, we trashed all of them, because again, it's just part of the process and making sure they know that because that could have a detrimental effect. So
and you need to take care of that as well. That's it's a good point because the motivation of your team is also depending. Well, the speed of your prototyping depends on the motivation of your team. So you need to keep their spirits high, even though it is a very uncertain time. It's a very chaotic time in the studio's lifetime. So it's a tough one.
So with that in mind too, I'm curious. I mean, you already shared some, I think, insight to this, but are there any other specifics while you're prototyping or examples, let's say, that are ever indicators that reveal, hey, this particular project, this particular prototype might not be worth pursuing? Like what are some examples maybe that stand out there like, oh, wow, okay, this clearly isn't working?
That sort of, I guess that depends on the game itself. But for instance, one of the prototypes that we were making before we're working on this one is that our game designer was just adding new features on top of each other and let's try this and let's try this and let's try this. And after a while, we just realized we're like the core loop isn't fun. And we're trying to make it more fun by adding more features on top of it. But if the core loop isn't fun, why are we even continue with this? So we kind of, we worked a long time on that before we hit that and we kind of realized that was a problem. But we had to can it and now working on something else. But that's an important one. If you can find that core loop and that's fun or interesting, then there's no use working or putting stuff on top of that. The other thing is obviously playtesting. Playtest is so important as inside the studio, as well as outside the studio with some players or your community that you have. We use our Discord community for You Suck at Parking. They're now playing a completely other type of genre, but it's good feedback to have from people that are outside of your studio and are real gamers, because it's a different perspective.
Yeah, and real quick on perspectives, I'm curious because I know sometimes we've interviewed someone from a couple episodes ago, I believe, from G Round, which is like a play testing service essentially. And I know one of the key points they made is, try to, where possible, go outside of your studio. But I'm thinking though, because we're talking about prototypes here, it can be a little bit different, especially if you're working with your team internally on a prototype, because it's still relatively new to everybody and it might play to different skill sets they have and everything. So it's still a fresh perspective. But still, I would say to your point, but I don't know, any comments about that? Because I know, generally speaking, you want external play testers, but in this situation, do you think it's just as valid, if not more so?
No.
Because of
it's definitely interesting to have an internal view as well, because our prototype team is maybe 1, 2, or 3 coders tops, because otherwise you start getting into trouble because it's not optimized, it's not architect.
Right. Yep.
So that means that there is 17 people in the studio that haven't played the game or aren't involved in making the game. So that is obviously that's as good as an external player. But the only, I guess, caveat is that you're nicer for each other inside the studio because you don't want to hurt feelings. Maybe.
Yep.
So that might be like if you go to a playtesting service or you do external playtesting and it's not with your friends and family, people can be brutally honest, and that's what you need in this period.
Yeah. So a lot of those principles still apply. However, sometimes but because it's so new, it's not like you're so close or involved with the project, so you don't have that bias or tunnel vision either. So, as you go further into the project, then it's like, okay, more important to reach outward opposed to just got it. Cool. Now,
and it's all. Sorry,
keep going.
I interrupted you.
Nope.
Okay. No, it's also important because those playtesters that you take along the ride, they become your ambassadors later on as marketing. So it's not only playtesting. They're probably going, if you do early access or you do whatever you launch, they are gonna already play the game, so they're gonna be super hyped. So that's also a small advantage that you have.
Yeah, definitely. They become really vested in the project to the point where, like you said, brand advocates and such. So, all right, cool. So we get to this point now, clear, like from that, you're really getting involved, got a prototype. You said, all right, we're focusing on this one project. Clearly, too, scope can creep up and everything else. And in terms of going back to everything you were defining before, what is that core loop? And let's try not to stagger all these other or pile up all these other features and stuff. So what are some of the ways that your team, limits scope creep while still introducing mechanics and other elements that ensure that the players are engaged or that really provide a greater experience in addition to that core loop that you establish?
Oh, that's the hardest question in game design. How do you limit scope creep? You don't. It's not possible. I don't know. It's an iterative way of designing stuff, so there's always going to be some scope creep. But I guess going back to my point, you don't have to prototype everything. If you know a certain mechanic or a certain feature works in other games, you probably can get it right. And I guess it's less about scope prototyping that and having focus on what really needs to be tested. But sometimes you need to make hard decisions and just say we're not gonna prototype this, or there's no room, there's no budget, there's no whatever. the toughest question in game development.
So you mentioned some things like a few areas, right? So obviously like budget, resources, that can be an easy like default to like, hey, we're limited with this, right? But that also can help really define or prioritize, what that focus is. So do you think from a team perspective, and even if let's say there's a small team where there really isn't like any form of hierarchy, like, a game director, designer, whatever the case may be, do you think it's important to maybe someone take that lead, or at least if it's a small team, everybody be on the same page and be like, hey, we really want to focus on this, and then and categorize these things? Or is that a system that can work, or what else can do that to really keep that focus honed in on making it fun?
So you need somebody to take the lead in the prototyping. That's probably going to be your game director or your game designer, because they know what they want to make and they can articulate best to your team. But at the same time, it's coming back to the point of the beginning of this podcast, is that you need somebody with business sense there as well, and that's always that juxtaposition between the budget and the creative. But it is, you need to have like a project manager, producer, or a CEO, whatever role you have in your studio, that needs to talk to your creative people and see, and that is also going to define scope and budget and everything else. But it's not a fun exercise for both, because you want your creative to have all the freedom, right, but there's also a limited budget, and they want to make the biggest scoped game because that's what the player really wants. But then it's always a give and take. But
it's definitely give and take. But at the same time, even though this is definitely a challenge everybody faces with, it's still, when you're looking at things from those perspectives and from both sides, let's say the more business side and also the more creative side. But if with everybody being on the same page, I think that also can create a lot of opportunities for a lot of cool ways to be creative within scope, within budget, within all these other things. I mean, classic example I like to use in these cases is like Silent Hill. And like basically, how do you work within limitations to even create a better experience? And Silent Hill, it was the limitations of the PlayStation at that time, where like, okay, we can't have this really big view in terms of what a player can see. So we're going to just douse everything in a fog. And my God, that made it like amazing, right? And like BioShock 2, what was it? Ken Levine was all about like limitations in the space that they were in, and that's like feeling trapped and really like you're underwater type stuff. But anyways, those are very probably more design focused, but still, it's like with these limitations, a lot of great things could happen too. It's just just that challenge of figuring them out, and why it's such a challenge to come to those conclusions.
Yeah.
So with that said, do you think? I mean, we did talk about this more, but like at this point, how valid is playtesting then? Because I know sometimes people are like, oh, hey, the project isn't ready, we're still prototyping. But from your perspective, how valuable is playtesting from here on out? Does it grow? Does it like come in stages? How important is playtesting?
Playtesting is important from day one. Really from day one. When there is just a cube moving, even then it's valuable to have some feedback. We do at least weekly internal playtests for the prototypes. There's also a demo that we show the rest of the team what we're working on. It's super valuable because you're always in your bubble as a developer. You're always thinking this is going to be the greatest game, or this is what it needs, and then you go out and you do like 5 or 10 interviews with actual players, and then you see that no, that's not what they want. They want something, or they understand that this game is something completely different, and that in turn can give you like that creative fuel within the box that you defined yourself. I know that lots of prototypes have taken a whole different direction because of player feedback. So I think it is important. External feedback isn't easy if you don't have a community. There's lots of tools, but they are expensive. So yeah. But like there's this story of Rami Ismail that back then when he was working on, I think, was it Ridiculous Fishing? I don't know, some kind of mobile game.
Yep.
That he sort of that he just went on a train and he just gave his phone to a stranger that he doesn't know, and hey, I'm making a game, give me feedback. And they will give you straight up feedback because they don't know you. They don't care about your feelings. Well, a little bit, obviously, we're humans after all. But they will give you straight feedback because there's nothing for them to gain to give you like sugarcoat it or
right.
And that's for free. You know, it's just your commute. Give your game to somebody and let them play.
Yeah, so definitely value there. Now, with that said, though, because this is so early and a lot of different factors can really influence the direction, but making sure that the direction is still in line where you want it to be. So it's like, are there any good processes or suggestions that you have or that you guys follow to make sure that, hey, this feedback is great, but does it align, emphasize, or make particular points about our vision, or could it set us off track?
No, there's definitely some things that we use. We mostly have our audience in mind from the get-go. This is the type of player that wants to play. And that's something that you really can already make some decisions on. But what we try to do, and it doesn't always work from the start, but we want to make some like creative pillars or design pillars for the game as soon as possible. And then we can just check, does it fit our design pillars? And then with that, we can eliminate a lot of stuff together. But it's always a discussion. There's no real process. It's always it's iterative, and you just need to follow the fun and see where the cool things are. It's not always where you want them to be.
You know, I might have to borrow that from you. Just follow the fun.
Oh, it's not for me. No.
Oh.
It's the quote is, I don't remember. Probably if you Google it, then you probably find it. It's fail fast and follow the fun, or follow the fun and fail fast. It's a probably like 10 years old or 20 years old already. It's like a game designer. I think it said it at GTC or something. Anyway, person much more smarter than me said it before, so I'm just stealing it.
So you're borrowing it too. All right, we'll borrow it together then.
Yes.
Love it. But no, great point there. Now, I know we're coming on time here, so before we go, we discussed a lot the importance of prototyping and limiting the scope of that conversation. What are some tips, suggestions you either wanted to share, reiterate? What are the key things to really take away from what we just discussed?
So 3 tips, I guess. I think the doing the work before you start prototyping, doing the product market fit, doing the business strategy is important, because that's going to define what you're making up, and then the throwaway codes and making sure that everybody understands that this is gonna be canned someday, or features are not going to be in there that we're prototyping. If people know that makes it an easier process. And then scoping the prototype down to what really needs to be prototyped. If there's a feature, or you don't need to prototype a leaderboard. Everybody knows a leaderboard works.
Yep.
But you might need to prototype a leaderboard that works in a very special or way that only works in your game. Then you need to prototype it. For the rest, scope it down. You're burning people, money, time with prototyping. Obviously, it needs to be done right. It also needs to be done fast as possible, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I mean, again, speed is such an important factor in this time, in this process, because, I mean, let's face it, even regardless of what your runway looks like, what you have for budget, what you have for funds, it's not infinite. And in most cases, it's never infinite.
It's never. No, and the market is changing so much and so fast.
There you go. Exactly. So even if you had an infinite budget, between how fast things change, like you need a pivot. So, I mean, because your energy on a project or doing multiple projects is never infinite, right?
No.
So it's not about funds, people. It's really about time and resources when you nail down. So excellent. Great point. All right. Well, Jeroen, can't thank you enough for being here. But before we go, what are ways people can get in touch with you? What are ways people can find out more about Happy Volcano, your past games, especially You Suck at Parking, because, there's just been lots going on with that game, but especially it's just a lot of fun too. But please share. How can people reach you, connect, Happy Volcano games, etc.?
Yes. So you can reach me on my email, which is jeroen@happyvolcano.com. You can also probably find me on LinkedIn. The studio website is happyvolcano.com and the games website is yousuckatparking.cc. We're on Steam and Xbox. We're also on Game Pass, and we are coming out with Switch and PlayStation versions, depending on when you air this, pretty soon.
Yeah, I think it would be pretty soon because I know it's slated towards sometime down the road. I believe is it this year, right?
Yeah, it's definitely this year.
So, So definitely things to check out, to look out for. But yeah, like you said, it's coming out on those two platforms. It's currently on Steam, Xbox, and we dropped some links in there. Will be on the show notes, which are included in the description of this podcast. So if you want to check out more, reach out to Jeroen. There's your way to do it. So Jeroen, thank you so much for sharing this. I think a lot of this is really helpful information and will give people much better direction and focus in terms of, creating these prototypes and really limiting their scope. So thank you so much for being here today.
Glad I was here. I had a fun time. Thank you.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.